Good day, awesome YouTubers. It is Lollyman16 here for a Dragon Ball review. Today we're going to be looking at the Pilaf arc in Dragon Ball. Now recently I have been rewatching the entire Dragon Ball series in Japanese with subtitles. Actually, this is the first time that I ever watched it with subtitles. I have watched some, but not all, of Dragon Ball before, but that was with the English dub. And today I want to talk to you guys about the Pilaf arc. It is the first arc of Dragon Ball, and it does set a good basis for later arcs and later stories to come. So when analyzing Dragon Ball, we have to see, does it hold up to Dragon Ball Z and the later on successors to this show? And for that I have to say yes. Probably not this arc as a first arc, but it does give a good basis. It introduces us to a lot of people and potentially a lot of things that may or may not play in later on in the Dragon Ball franchise. So it really starts out with Son Goku, and he meets some people, like for instance here I have shown he meets this guy Yamcha or Yamcha, who would play obviously a bigger role later on. But it's funny to see how Goku can meet all these guys, so young, and still be involved in some of the stuff they do. He meets people along the way such as Oolong and Puar, shapeshifters. Well, they're both shapeshifters who have come from the same school, and it's wacky Toriyama humor, wacky Toriyama character. Watching this for the first time, it's very different from Dragon Ball Z and later successors like GT and Dragon Ball Super. It is quite a different show. It's more of cartoonish kind of humor, but it's elevated to a level where you can be an adult and still enjoy it very much, because there are a lot of adult jokes in this arc. Moving on to some of the villains of the series, we have the Pilaf gang, who is the central antagonist to this arc. I find Pilaf to be a kind of your average kind of villain, but not really. What I mean by this is Pilaf is that kind of guy where he acts really tough and he acts really strong and as a villain, but really he's not really powerful at all. He's just a imp. And I find Toriyama's humor funny with this, how Pilaf is the one who wants to rule the world, trying to find the Dragon Balls with his two I guess you would say minions, Shu and Mai. And of course we know Mai has a much bigger role later on, way later on, but it's great to see these characters, although we don't know their origins and whatnot. It's kind of classic Toriyama humor and really just kid humor, really, because when looking at it, it's not supposed to be really taken seriously. There's no really in-depth story into this. It's just really one kid and one teen girl trying to explore the world and find Dragon Balls. Some other cool and interesting villains I see in this arc are, and really is, I think there's about only one other one, and that would have to be this guy, Boss Rabbit, right here. What's interesting about Boss Rabbit is he is a guy who can basically turn anyone into a carrot if he touches them. I find this really funny. Again, it's wacky Toriyama humor and wacky Toriyama storytelling, but it really does hold up. I really do enjoy this first arc. Maybe not as much as later on stories, because it's not in depth, but it's really funny, kid-friendly adventure and kind of humor. We do see scenes of Goku fighting in this arc, and it really gives us a basis of how strong Goku really is. For example, Goku in the first episode, he can tank bullets like no problem, and we see later on he could do amazing feats that no other human could do, which obviously Toriyama did not speculate or think of Goku as to be a Saiyajin or an alien yet. But it's interesting to see how Toriyama thought in the beginning, how these characters were set up in the beginning. again, I do enjoy it. It really does hold up in terms of value. You know, it is quite an old series. It's about 30 years old, but I still consider it one of the best, you know, parts to the franchise. This first arc, and later on storylines that come suit in after suit. Talking about some other interesting things about this first arc. Of course, Yamcha, the rival of Goku at the time. Of course, Vegeta was not conceptualized at this point. But you know, Yamcha is that kind of guy. He's kind of that classic. What do you call it? He's kind of that classic badass, but not really a badass. And what I mean by this is, he has afraid of the opposite gender. He's kind of afraid of that, but yet he does have great skills, and it's great to see Yamcha being used as a awesome character, you know, because he is a desert bandit. And when he fought Goku for the first time, it's, you know, it seems like Yamcha, this guy would have a lot of skill. It's almost sad to say that Yamcha never really got to shine later on. When I say later on, I mean by like Dragon Ball Z days, like that kind of thing. He did, you know, training with Kami and all that, but it's kind of sad to see Yamcha not being used. But other than that, other characters like Bulma, Oolong, Puar, basically the whole gang up until this point. Of course, Krillin hasn't come into the picture yet, but their wacky adventures are certainly a delight to see. So what do I think overall of the Pilaf arc? It's probably not as good as some of the other Dragon Ball arcs. In fact, I would say it's probably doesn't really. It's just an introductory thing. I don't really consider it that great of an arc. You know, the antagonists and stuff. One thing I did like about it though is at the very end when Goku transformed into a Ozaru. That gave us kind of a precursor to what's to come. And of course it gives us kind of the explanation of, you know, how his grandfather perished much later on in this series. You know, looking back on it, it's kind of interesting watching the successor series first and then going back and watching Dragon Ball. I find it very interesting seeing these things for the first time ever. You know, seeing how Goku met Yamcha, how he met Bulma, how Oolong and Puar are actually involved in the story. It's interesting to see that because you never really get the feeling of how important these characters are later on in Z because you were never introduced to them in the first place. So what do I think overall of this arc? It's a good arc, I think. It's a good setup to what's to come because in the end we see Goku going off to train with Muten Roshi and his friends do leave, but I know they will have a much greater role later on. My overall impressions of the Pilaf arc, watching it for the first time, a good arc, not the best arc, but a good setup, and definitely go watch it if you have not. Just to get the feel of what Dragon Ball is, at least in the beginning. Of course, it does get more serious later on, but you know, if you want that classic adventure storyline and Toriyama's wacky humor along with it, along with the introduction of Son Goku in the forest, you know, finding the 4-star Dragon Ball and finding the other Dragon Balls, definitely go watch this part of the series. That's all for me, guys. Follow me on Twitter if you have not already. I'll see you guys later. Stay awesome, everybody, and have a good one.